Okay, so more Tales from the Crypt of Monsanto documents that recently came out in August. They had a whole attack plan for what to do about my colleague's book. Carrie Gillum, she spoke here last year, and she wrote a book called Whitewash, The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer, and the Corruption of Science. It won the Rachel Carson Environment Book Award from the Society for Environmental Journalists. Amazing book. Monsanto was very worried about it. And Carrie was a reporter at Reuters for 20 years where she covered agriculture, and they basically ran her out of there, extreme pressure for her to leave there. And then she joined our group. So they had this whole spreadsheet. What's interesting about this is a few things. They had paid placement on Google in a search for her name. They had a whole plan to generate negative book reviews. They even had plans to engage regulatory authorities in their talking points. I thought that one was interesting. EPA, the European Food Safety Authority, the European Chemicals Agency. They had a whole bunch of third parties with names like Sense About Science, the Science Media Center, the Global Farmer Network, American Chemistry Council Side Front Group. So, they did all that. And farmers are, of course, a very important spokespeople, third-party allies for the companies. So one of the interesting documents that also came out recently involves this coalition that they organized in Europe called Freedom to Farm. So here's the document. It's from Fleischmann Hillard, which is one of the world's largest PR firms. And they work with Monsanto, with Bayer, as one of the leading firms. They were actually hired to try to rehabilitate the image of GMOs back in 2013 because of the GMO labeling fights. So, Freedom to Farm. I'm going to read a little bit here from a story that was in The Independent in Europe. As pressure mounted in the European Union to ban glyphosate after the International Agency for Research on Cancer, that's one of the world's leading panels of independent cancer researchers with the World Health Organization, deemed the chemical a probable cause of cancer, members of a group calling itself Freedom to Farm began appearing at agricultural events and farmers markets across Europe. Marketing itself as a grassroots-led effort by farmers, Freedom to Farm warned of a threat to farming posed by those seeking to restrict the use of glyphosate. The group reportedly hired hostesses to sign up farmers to help defend the chemical against its critics. So most of this group was PR folks trying to hustle up farmer interest in saying something about glyphosate. But the fascinating thing about this is it says in this document, look at these numbers. The campaign team involved 39 and a half full-time staffers working in 7 European countries. But these included 21 Fleischmann employees, 9 employees from Red Flag Consultant, and 7 from Lincoln Strategies, which was a group. These were groups that also worked on the Trump campaign, by the way. Okay, but that wasn't all, because in addition, they had 56 trained operatives supporting them at these locations. So that's Freedom to Farm for you. It's the ability of PR companies to send for over almost 100 people out traipsing across Europe, cooking up plans to, look like farmers, basically. And there was much more in this plan. They had websites they were planning. They sponsored a bunch of research, a whole bunch of research in all these countries designed to drive headlines, designed to fight against glyphosate regulations. We found out that Monsanto has a fusion center. These were some of the documents in the plan about U.S. right to know. So a fusion center is a term borrowed from Homeland Security and described coordinated intelligence gathering operations. There was an article about this in the New York Times in 2018 about fusion centers, about how banks are using them, and the centers are trained by, quote, former government cyber spies, soldiers, and counterintelligence officials who deploy the tools and techniques used for national defense. Intelligence hubs modeled on those used in counterterrorism work, and threat analysts who monitor the internet's shadowy corners. Well, they're watching you if you talk about pesticides They're watching some of us in this room. And by watching us, I mean every tweet you send. Online posts. There was one of the documents that came out of the Monsanto papers was called the Let Nothing Go program, in which they talked about how we're not letting anything go. So if your mother is posting about GMOs, and this has happened to my mother, some random dude, was arguing with me. I don't know who that person is. Well, they're really watching they're scrutinizing at a very close level. So, and what do Monsanto's fusion centers do? We don't know. This was just sort of the beginning of figuring out this. But there was a story in the Guardian by Sam Levin. So he reported that what they were doing, as far as we could tell by this point, or he could tell, they're monitoring digital properties and social media activities, and they're providing detailed analysis of tweets and other content produced by journalists, activists, even popular singers. So they were looking at Neil Young, who wrote a album called The Monsanto Years. So they were really worried about Neil Young, and they had a plan to proactively produce content in response preparedness. They were analyzing his lyrics and closely monitoring discussions about concerts featuring Young and Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp and Dave Matthews. So, a department at Monsanto is watching what these guys do. And not only them, they were also watching a teenager. This is an email about Rachel Parent, who's a teenager who started Kids Right to Know in Canada. And so the Fusion Center here, this email is saying they're watching Rachel. They're very worried because she's coming to a Monsanto a Bayer shareholder meeting. What is she going to do? We don't know who might be there. So the Fusion Center comes out with this report. He emails it to 11 Monsanto employees that they've been monitoring her crowdfunding page and other activists. It's small. She's raised only $245, but given the effort and planning, it is likely she already has funding, which could be from her father's natural food business. See attached report for more. Okay, so they've got 11 Monsanto employees sitting around worrying about what this one teenager might say at a shareholder meeting, what Neil Young says in his songs. Oh, and here's a good one. This was part of the Monsanto preparedness plan for U.S. Right to Know, their tweet responder. So they've got a plan for if Gary Ruskin sends one tweet, the top left, that's my colleague. Okay, they're not too worried about that, but if 25 tweets, if there's 50, if tweets over days, they've had a plan to call emergency steering committee meetings of GMO answers if these tweets got too out of control. That's the leading pesticide companies in the world on a steering committee of this group. So they're extremely, extremely threatened by transparency and truth tellers and people who are standing up to their agenda. And I think that's really good news. It's really good news. And it means we have to keep doing it, right? Keep exposing these documents, keep saying the truth, being willing to stand up against this sort of ferocious backlash of hellfire, really. That's what these campaigns are. They see themselves in a mentality of warfare. With fusion centers and attack plans, they discredit scientists, they discredit journalists. This is a big part of what's come out of the Monsanto documents, is they had a whole entire plan to discredit the World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency. And they did it by deploying not only your regular old front groups that get paid directly by them to act like they're independent, the Genetic Literacy Project, American Council on Science and Health, Academics Review, GMO Answers, and groups with names like these, but they also had major food industry groups supporting them, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, and food groups that get millions of dollars a year to convince people that processed foods are okay, pesticides are fine,